Okay, we're just going back to the proposal. We have a proposal by Councillor Kerrigan, and it's seconded by, who seconded it? Councillor Hussey. Keith, do you want to read your proposal again? Just for...
Sorry, Chair. Apologies there. I've got cut out a wee bit there. Chair, in this regard, then I think it's the wording of it there. Hold on 1 minute. I have some wording right down here. I'm just trying to get it here. One minute. Sorry, Chair. iPad cut out there, Chair. Apologies. Chair, from my reading of it here, sorry, I'm just getting me when you're picking between two screens. Chair, I would be minded that it is not, that it is a gap site, and it will, that would be my minded. It is a gap site that will fit two dwellings, Chair, and that would be my minded of it. So that's would be the kind of line that I would be looking at, if that is an appropriate proposal, Chair, at present.
You're basically saying that it does constitute an infill, a double infill, is that?
That's it, Chair.
We're content to be seconding, Chair.
Okay. We'll take a vote, Maura. I'll just take a vote.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So members, just a reminder, this is item 5 and this is a vote not to accept officer's recommendation. Alderman Alan Breslin. Alan Breslin.
I'm still here, but I'm a wee bit puzzled now. I'm still the same against.
Yes, thank you. Alderman Derek Hussey.
Chair, Alan's contribution there has confused me again, so it has. Could we have the proposal? Yeah.
Will I read out the...
Just Maura will read out the proposal again and we'll start again.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
So Councillor Kerrigan's proposal was not to accept the officer's recommendation. And the officer's recommendation was to refuse the application. And the reasons were given in regard to the policy. So I'll go back in terms of not to accept the officer's recommendation for or against that. Alderman Alan Breslin.
For.
Alderman Derek Hussey.
For, thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Keith Kerrigan.
For, Maura.
Thank you. Alderman Hilary McClintock.
For, Maura.
Thanks. Councillor Jason Barr. Councillor Jason Barr. No. Councillor John Boyle.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Angela Dobbins.
For, Maura.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Gallagher.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Christopher Jackson.
For, Maura.
Thanks. Councillor Dan Kelly.
For, Maura.
Thanks. Councillor Patricia Logue.
For, Maura.
Thanks, got it, yeah. Councillor Kieran Maguire. Thanks, Kieran. Councillor Philip McKinney, apologies. And Councillor Sean Mooney.
Against.
Okay. Thank you. So that's 9-4 and 3 against, Chair.
Okay. That is item 5. Yeah, we'll just take 10 minutes before we go into item 6. Okay. Okay. Suzanne?
Thanks, Chair. I'm just sharing the screen here, hopefully. Okay, members, this is Appendix 6. It's LA 11 2021 08920, and it's a site for replacement of a Nissan hut with a dwelling and garage on lands approximately 60 metres north of 72 Letterbrat Road, Letterbrat, Plumbridge, and the recommendation is to refuse. So this slide shows you the location map on the left submitted with the application and then the satellite overhead. We have the application site outlined in red, and we have the Nissan hut just shaded green. And you can see there we've highlighted the other existing development in the area. There is a live approval on the site indicated here, approved outline site, and then there are a number of existing dwellings and buildings to the south. So the application is proposing to replace the Nissan hut with a replacement dwelling, and you can see here in the first photo on the left, a photo of the hut. You can see it here taken from the road. The actual one part of the wall has now been taken, has been removed or has come off it. That's just the how it looks just in the context of the road travelling north. In terms of the policy context, it's listed there in terms of the Strand Area Plan, the SPPS, and then obviously PPS 21, which is a material consideration in this case, and PPS 2 and 3 in the supplementary planning guidance. Consultations all returned no issues of concern, and we do have a number of objections which have been submitted, which I'll come to, but I'll just take you through the policy context first. So CTY 3 does allow for the replacement of a dwelling, providing it exhibits the existing characteristics, the essential characteristics of a dwelling. In this case, officers have considered that the Nissan hut does not exhibit any dwelling characteristics. It's not a permanent dwelling. It's been obviously been redundant for quite some time now. It doesn't have any internal residential layout, no of rooms, no existing utilities, no separate address, no separate access or curtilage. And it's so therefore we recommend that it's not a replacement dwelling. And there's no clear environmental benefits of replacing this redundant residential building. A possible solution would be to probably incorporate this building into the design and layout of the approved dwelling already on part of the site. In terms of CTY 8, the interpretation of that basically is to replace the hut off site, and you'll recall, I'm just trying to bring up the map again, is to propose it to bring it out further north into this site here, which is currently an existing large agricultural field, and its officers' view in complying with the policy and also the advice in the supplementary planning guidance that this would actually extend the existing ribbon of development that exists along that road. And this will be contrary to CTY 8 and also contrary to CTY 14. The agent did submit additional information and supporting information regarding the history of the site, and they submitted also, which included, that it was used for Allied forces during the Second World War. They submitted some internal photos showing the dormers and a flue, and a letter from a local resident who remembers American troops living in it. The agent also submitted details, real reference numbers really, of similar proposals that they had been granted in other districts. But there's no other information come in on the back of those, and I'll just run down those now when we're on the slide. The first one there, S 1995-0636, that was in Carryduff Road, Lisburn, and that was the replacement of a Nissan hut with a garage and store. So that's not a comparable case, and in any case, it's 1995. The policy context is completely different than what we're looking at now. The second reference number there, K2006-1809, that's reserved matters, and that was for a site for a dwelling and domestic garage to replace an existing disused hall, and that was in Trillick in County Tyrone. So no, and we're not able to see the reports here, members. So, and as I say, the cases are historic. The third one there, just for completeness, was L2005-0037, and that was our site for a dwelling in Ardshankel, Bow Island, Cash. So there's no information there that this was a comparable case in terms of the replacement of a Nissan hut. So here you can just see some photos. There's flues, vents or openings on the side of the building there, and there's obviously the existing windows are dormer in style as well. Other policy considerations that we're required to consider. The site is in close proximity to Letterbrack Quarry and an adjacent approved infill site, but given the separation distance, it's considered there will be no detrimental impact on residential amenity. There's no issues in terms of PPS2 and local biodiversity or natural heritage, and no issues in terms of roads. We have received an objection on plan and policy grounds, stating that the building to be replaced is dilapidated and non-residential in structure. And you'll see, members, through the case officer report, we've looked at each of these issues individually. So officers would agree with that point. The issue then with regard that is contrary to CTY3, the hut's walls are not substantially intact. Well, it's contrary to CTY3 because it doesn't exhibit the characteristics of a dwelling, really. And the issue in terms of moving the curtilage to allow space for another building off-site replacement is also another valid issue, in that there are no demonstrable or landscape heritage benefits from the proposal, and it will extend a ribbon of development, which is contrary to CTY 18 or CTY 8 and 14. So on that basis, members, recommend refusal has been put forward in your reports for the reasons that are set out there in terms of contrary to CTY 3, and that the structure does not exhibit the essential characteristics of a dwelling, and it's not sited within the established curtilage of the existing dwelling, and it has not been shown that the alternative position nearby would result in demonstrable landscape heritage, access or amenity benefits. And then, in contrary to CTY 8 and 14, that it would add to an existing ribbon of development at this location and would have permitted detrimentally alter the rural character of this area of natural beauty. Thank you.
Suzanne, and Brenda Johns, speaker.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Members, at the outset, I would suggest this application presents a fairly unique case, which requires particular consideration. The proposal is basically for the replacement of a Nissan hut formerly used for accommodation purposes. They were particularly important during the Second World War to accommodate groups of soldiers in barracks. They were constructed of a prefabricated steel structure and walls of curved corrugated iron, easily erected, and like Orlet housing, whilst being considered temporary, say for the duration of the war, they were continued to be used post-war for many years as substitute housing until housing stocks were replenished. As Suzanne mentioned, there's an initial planning history search revealed 3 such cases where buildings such as Nissan huts were replaced with other buildings. But the main consideration in these was planning betterment, which we'll deal with later on. Evidence which should be on file from older members of the Plumbridge community provided to the council, advising that during the war up to 30 American soldiers were billeted in the accommodation and was used periodically by the B Specials in the 1960s. So, and the building can quite clearly be seen on the 1957 Ordnance Survey maps. So it has been in the local landscape for at least 65 years and not parachuted in to try and obtain a replacement as had previously been suggested. Whilst the design of the building was described in the council report as a dilapidated non-residential structure that would have been described as a shed or store of temporary construction, it would be more clear to the older generation that this type of building played a very important role in providing historic accommodation for a variety of personnel for at least 25 years up to the end of the 1960s. The planners in Appendix 6 of their report under the heading of Building on Tradition concluded that it is not considered that the off-siting of a new permanent dwelling replacing a large tin structure to be betterment for this rural AONB landscape. Now, curiously, this would suggest that they consider that the retention of the old building would have a greater visual quality in the landscape than a new, modest, traditional dwelling in the AONB. The design of the Nissen building, whilst not being traditional in the landscape, was innovative at the time. And again, in the publication of Building on Tradition, which is a supplementary guidance to PPS 21, Chapter 02 encourages new contemporary rural dwelling designs, including the curved wagon roof, which imitates old barren structures. In addition, more and more popular are the curved roof glamping pod designs, which have been approved in scenic tourist areas. So clearly the shape of the roof does not always determine the building's usage. The application is for Mr. Blee, who not only owns a farm on the road to Dunnamana, but also the dwelling immediately to the south of the application site, as well as the recently approved infill site between the two. It's Mr. Blee's intention to retire from farming and leave the operation to one of the family. Two members of the family want to return to the homeland. One is from San Francisco and the other in Belfast. And one of them will be taking on the operation of the farm. The sites are also close to the village and close to all amenities, and would be very popular in terms of the fact that there's very little housing capacity left within the limits of development. So in terms of the current planning policy, the Strabane area plan is still the extant plan for the area. It identifies the site as being within the Sperrins AONB, which would be a particularly sensitive location. However, it does say at paragraph 125.1 that a less restrictive policy could be applied in the AONB in an effort to address rural depopulation. PPS 21 at policy CT1 identified are considered to be acceptable in the countryside. It goes on to state that planning permission will be granted for an individual dwelling in the case of a replacement dwelling in accordance with CTY 3. Members accept that the principal use of the building was residential, then the provisions of this policy applies. This policy requires that the building to be replaced exhibits the essential characteristics of a dwelling and should have all external structural walls substantially intact. The planners in the report claim that the building does not exhibit any residential characteristics, and yet there are two wood-burning stove chimney outlets which were used for heating and cooking, as well as 4 dormer windows, that's 2 to each side, which give high-level lighting to the accommodation. These are quite plain to be seen on the photographs that were submitted with the application. The planners state that the building has no utilities, postal address, means of access or curtilage, but this is not a requirement as set out in the policy. The policy defines a curtilage as being the immediate and usually defined and enclosed area surrounding the former dwelling house. The term usually defined and enclosed area would suggest that the curtilage need not always be defined or enclosed.
Excuse me, Mr. Jones, I'm sorry, but your 5-minute speaking allowance is up.
Oh, right, sorry about that.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Jones?
Chair, just one quick
So-
one.
Councillor Hussey and then Councillor Kelly.
I'm always, I'm always perturbed at the time that we allocate. Sorry, can I allow Councillor Kelly to go until I get a drink of water?
Go ahead, Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Mr. Johns for that. I have a couple of questions. I would hope maybe he would just build on in terms of the report that we've received on this site. One is in relation to, I suppose, the nature of the structure. I'm not aware of Nissen huts being deployed in any other circumstance other than to provide accommodation. So I just wonder, is he aware of that? I note from the report there's no attempt, maybe through our NIEA or some of the heritage consultees, to establish this fact. So I'm just wondering, is he aware of that? I know from, I'm taking the bona fides of the letter of advising of troops being based there, and I am very familiar with the site. It's not a million miles from my grandparents' house, and I would have passed it regularly, visiting them. So I do know this area well, and I would have heard the stories. And I know troops were based at Letterbrat House. They were deployed there for a time, using Valentine's Quarry, which is on the other side of this Nissen hut, for field artillery exercises before being shipped out to Europe. So I am aware of the local history in terms of troops being posted here. So I'm just wondering, does he have any more information on that? And in relation to the issue in the report around low windows on the lower story, I'm not aware of Nissen huts having 2 stories. So does he have any more information on that? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. No, I have no real in-depth detail of this particular Nissen hut. I've searched in the NIEA historic website, but I mean, this was a standard issue for accommodation basically all over Northern Ireland, and including Castle Archdale and Ardbow airports. And it was just the was accommodation for a lot of troops to eat, sleep, be based there. That's basically all I know about them. Your second question, Councillor, again?
The windows on the lower story, was it?
Yes. Sorry, Councillor. Yes, look, as I said before, this is a standard design. This was an innovative design at the time, easily erected, with the steel curved structure and a corrugated iron, and there would have been one design fits all. This would have been standard, really, to let enough light in to the inside for sleeping purposes and living quarters.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Alderman Hussey.
Sorry, Chair, I did have one other question. Is it the case that even with the proposed sort of off-site terminology, that the replacement would still be within the original curtilage of the dwelling at the time it was erected?
Councillor, if I could just say that the curtilage doesn't seem to have been defined, and on the 1957 Ordnance Survey maps, it was just shown as it is now, a building inside that field. But if I could just point out that the policy, it says that a replacement will be permitted if its curtilage is so restricted that it could not reasonably accommodate a modest-sized dwelling. So, you know, the policy does allow for a shift if it can't provide things like effluent disposal or access or private amenity space. So it's not unknown that replacement dwellings have been able to be moved within the site. Don't have to be exactly on the same footprint.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Hussey this time.
Thank you for that easement, Chair. And I'm looking at the pictures there, and perhaps unlike several, quite a few in the room, I have a fond recollection of Nissen huts, particularly the repurposing of what were essentially military accommodation blocks. The windows, they're an exact replica of the Nissen hut that I when I moved to grammar school that I was taught in. And indeed, mention was made there of the ultra special constabulary, and again, I have fond memories of use of those particular buildings. But as has rightly been said, their purpose was accommodation, and they were repurposed after the war for other uses. Am I correct in thinking that there would have been Nissen hut accommodation out the Buncrana Road in the city itself here? I'm not sure about that, but I think it may be. Councillor Kelly has highlighted most of the points there. The issue of the siting of a replacement dwelling, and I accept what we are talking about is a replacement dwelling. Could Brendan elaborate a wee bit on that with regard particularly to the footprint, and what sort of percentages would we be talking about as needed for modern day living over and above the present footprint of that present dwelling building? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. As I mentioned earlier, although the policy for all replacement cases suggests that the proposed replacement should be sited within its established curtilage, it does go on to say at the very first bullet point in CTY 3 that a replacement will be permitted if its curtilage is so restricted that it could not reasonably accommodate a modest-sized dwelling. So, I mean, the policy does allow for the footprint to be moved within the site. Now, speaking from experience within planning over the years, it was generally considered that something within around about 20-25 metres from the original footprint was acceptable. You know, but every site obviously was not the same, but there was a relaxation in terms of where it could be moved.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Gallagher.
Yes, things not good today for me. Just in regards to Councillor Kelly, I think you wouldn't have to go too far in Derry to talk about residential and Nissen huts when you talk about Springtown, because it was very much this was the type of living accommodation for many family and for many a year in that area. And it was also the unfortunate residential quarters for many political prisoners in the early 70s in one case. And when I stood at the end. But I just have one question that around this building and getting recognised as a building for infill on a other application. So I get the sort of sense is this a building, is it not a building, but it was a building on a previous application. And then when we're looking at it now, it's not a building. So I'm not 100% if we could get some elaboration on that.
Was that to me? Was that to me, Chair?
Yeah. Do you?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, there was an infill opportunity approved on the immediate site, if we can say, to the south of the hut. Now, whenever it was been determined that the infill opportunity was between three existing buildings, it was two houses to the south and the Nissen hut to the north. So the infill site was approved, accepted by the planners. It didn't get as far as the committee, so it was approved by the planners. So they recognised that a building existed as per the Nissen hut. Does that explain that?
Thank you.
Oh,
Have we lost all sound, Chair?
I can't hear anything anyway. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can't hear you, but I hear Derek and
Yeah. Same here.
Have,
Folks,
have
there
we lost
seems to
the
be
old phone?
some issue internally here at the moment, but I can hear all of you members. So just bear with us for a minute or two.
Sorry. It's internally. We have over 5 minutes before. Right? We got more than 5 minutes. What time did the Newton Stewart one? No, that was more than 5 minutes.
Can I ask people just to make sure that their microphones are switched off? Thank you. Just apologies to all of those at WebEx. We are having one or two wee problems here just getting connected up through the microphone system internally. So bear with us for one moment or two, please. Members, just to allow us to resolve this issue, we're just going to take a quick 10-minute recess here, and we will be back with you by 5 to hopefully. Thank you.
Hello, testing. Do you hear me?
Yeah, Angela here. I can hear you.
I can hear too.
Perfect, thank you. Testing. Can everybody hear me?
Yep, Angela here.
Yeah.
Mr. Johns, are you back online?
Yes, Chair, I am. Thanks.
Councillor Gallagher, are you there?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah. Maybe you want to ask your question again, just.
Well, he did answer. Mine's Chair was just around. Some of the in the presentation that I'm saying about a building or not being a building, but it was recognised as a building when there was infill planning given. So that was the answer I got. So was happy enough.
Anyone? Any other questions?
Chair, very briefly.
Sorry, Keith.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question for Mr. Johns here. Just to clear it in my own head, there is the information has been granted then for a dwelling adjacent to number 72 between hut and this missing hut. I'm just clarifying that in my own head there. In which case, then, it would stand to reason if permission was granted for a replacement then to the was that permission that was granted, was that just an infill dwelling or it wasn't a replacement dwelling? Sure, I'm just seeking that clarification, and then I suppose then it would stand to reason then if looking at the road there and having looked at it with the pictures that are provided, and again looking through it on the street view and knowing where it is, not exactly, but knowing where it is location wise there, it's just the case that it would be tight. You would have to effectively move more to the north of the site to try and allow a wee bit of space that each of those dwellings in that section of the road would have sufficient area around them. But I'm just seeking that clarification that I have it in my head that there is a permission for 72 which hasn't been acted upon yet, and I'm just seeking clarification from the agent. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, Councillor, the approved dwelling was for an infill opportunity and not as a replacement. So in effect, it's the Nilsson hut was recognised as the building, but it wasn't a replacement for the one that was approved last year.
That's grand. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions for the agent? No. Questions for the officer?
Okay, if I just come in. Oh, go ahead, Dan, go ahead.
Who's first? Councillor Kelly?
Okay, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I have a couple of questions for the officer. One is just how conclusion that this wasn't, the Nissan Hut wasn't installed in a residential capacity. Given that there was representation made to council that clarified the situation around troops being based on the site, what clarification or what consultation process did council enter into in order to establish whether or not there was any sort of basis in fact within the consultee process for that, or did they just derive that as an internal conclusion? And the other question I have is in relation to the infill approval, Chair. And the query I have is clearly just last year, the planning department if it was as stated in the current planning report that this is an ancillary building or a service building for number 72, then there wasn't an opportunity for an infill last year. And I'm confused by that, because either it's a service building for number 72 or it isn't. And I think last year the planning department recognised that it wasn't when they afforded the infill opportunity, because if it was a service building, then the infill building wasn't an infill, but in fact just an approval in somebody's back garden, and that doesn't add up. So from my reading of it, it is a separate entity, and it was recognised just last year by our planners as a separate entity. Otherwise, if, as they're saying now, it's a service building, then there was no infill opportunity. So just some clarification on that. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'm just going to keep this in a wee minute. Okay, so firstly, Councillor Kelly, in terms of the actual principle of this, of a residential capacity, I mean, as officers, we're not doubting that this was ever built as a Nissan Hut. What we're looking at today, though, is an application for replacement dwelling. And replacement dwelling refers to dwelling. It doesn't refer to buildings that might have been used and built as temporary accommodation for more than one family or whatever, right? So quite clearly from the start, the use class of a Nissan Hut is different to the use class of a dwelling as defined in the use classes order. So that's our starting point in terms of, so there's no issue here. I mean, in terms of that it was ever used as accommodation. But the fact is now that it's obviously long since redundant. Since then, it hasn't been used as any permanent residential accommodation. So unlike other Nissan Huts that we would be familiar with, it was never modified or changed and occupied permanently until say for instance even just recently. So that was the assessment. So in terms of consultation, I don't think I would require any consultation to be and we wouldn't be. I know you'd mentioned earlier about consulting NIA. I wouldn't be familiar with why we would need to do that to make that assessment. In terms of the infill and the ancillary building issue, well, infill, I know the point you're making, but that site is a field. It's a field area. It's not a yard area. And clearly this building has been used for purposes other than residential okay. So it has been used as an ancillary building, and I think it's come out in some of the information as well. So the infill policy doesn't differentiate between ancillary building or, I mean, it looks at buildings. Obviously, there is guidance in the Buildings and Tradition about the appropriateness of infill and things like that. But it is a large building. I mean, it's not a small domestic garage or nothing like that, but it clearly has been used as a store. And that was really the basis for the infill recommendation. I think it'd be quite hard to not, I mean, as I say, the two policies are quite different. One looks for a dwelling and one looks for a building. So that was the reason why we came up with those recommendations, both the approval and the current position in terms of the Nissan Hut.
Councillor Kelly, is that you?
Thank you.
Councillor Gallagher.
Chair, my question's been asked or been answered. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions for the officer? Councillor Boyd.
Thanks, Chair. Just around, just a little bit of clarity around that, Suzanne, then, to ensure that I'm interpreting what you said correctly, then, that the infill opportunity was granted on the basis that the hut, whilst not habitable or not having not been inhabited for a very long time, still presented itself as a building, and so therefore that allowed that afforded the opportunity for the infill that's referenced in the report. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Chair, just before we move on, just a couple of things in relation to it. Well, the first thing is, Chair, actually, I'm going to put it in the record. I agree with a lot of what the objector has put forward and is presented to us in the paper. I just want to make that clear. In relation to this particular application, but actually, generally speaking, Nissan huts, when they were constructed, were indeed constructed for Allied personnel, most notably US personnel who came to these shores prior to the D-Day landings of 1944. And this city had significant experience of their presence at that particular time. However, Springtown Camp was referenced there, which is indeed would have been located what's now between the Northern Road and the Buncrana Road. But the people who lived in Springtown Camp didn't have a terrible lot of happy memories or fond memories of living in Springtown Camp. Indeed, those who found themselves living in Springtown Camp found themselves living there because there was nowhere else that they could live. And indeed, the first residents of Springtown Camp were squatters who moved into these particular tin Nissan huts, or Quonset huts, as the Americans knew them. There were no amenities available to them at all. They had no running water, they had no electricity. The accommodation was built and considered to have been temporary at that time. And the reason it wasn't temporary was because people had nowhere else to live. So let's get our heads around that for a start. The other thing in relation to this particular hut, this Nissan Quonset hut, the last time that this hut would have been inhabited on any permanent basis would have been 1945, 77 years ago. And I couldn't consider that to have been recent usage or use class that would deem it appropriate for a replacement. It is quite clearly dilapidated. The other issue I have in relation to this is that the curtilage is not evident, and indeed in one of the photographs we can see an oil tank right beside the Nissan hut. That oil tank, I'm sure, isn't the oil tank for the Nissan hut. So that would suggest to me that that curtilage is for a building very close by. And I could find no reason to do anything other than to support the officer's recommendation on this particular occasion. But again, I would want to emphasise the importance of remembering that many of the people who found themselves living in Nissan huts, Quonset huts, call them what you want, certainly do not have fond memories of living in them during particularly the winter months. I do know, obviously, that people who may have grown up as children enjoyed the freedom of the countryside, but I know from personal family experience that the adults certainly did not enjoy living in places like Springtown Camp. But that's by the by, that's just a history lesson. But at the same time, the history lesson is relevant in the sense that the last time this particular hut would have been used permanently would have been by US personnel or perhaps British Army personnel in 1945, 77 years ago. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Gallagher, then Councillor. Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back and John, I wasn't when I mentioned Springtown, I wasn't talking about fond memories. I'm far from it. What I was talking about was when we talk about Nissan huts and when we talk about whether they're residential or whether they're not, the fact is they were used as residential accommodation in Springtown. Whether they were of a poor quality is clear to be seen by everybody that lived in them, but they were residential, and they were also residential living quarters for political prisoners in Long Case. So I think to say that Nissan huts weren't designed for, well, they weren't used for living, they have been, and they have been in the past, and it's well documented that they have been in the past. That's the point I was making.
Alderman Kerrigan.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in. Chair, just seeking clarification there. As Suzanne can clarify there, I just don't have the policy right at my hand. Is there a stipulation as to a time frame as to when a dwelling has last have been lived in? You know, in regards to you know, since a house, you know, from a dwelling was used, because maybe I'm wrong, but I think I recall that we have past dwellings that have been vacant for some period of time. And again, I do take on board it was a dwelling house, was used for accommodation, as maybe not a dwelling house, sorry, isn't the correct term, but it was used as accommodation, as in my eyes here. And again, there are many structures that have been temporary structures that became more than temporary structures. You know, we have that. I mean, there's various. I can think of a housing estate that I was a couple of housing estates that I was on in Oma recently, where they're more of a fabricated dwelling. They're there, but they're permanent. They're there the 60, 70 years. You know, so there are various things there. So as I say, yes, it's in poor condition, but I would be minded that it did have the capacity of a dwelling house or dwelling, sorry, for use. So say just that clarification. But if Suzanne could just clarify, does it stipulate in the policy whereby that it has to be used for residential purposes within X amount of years, or is it within a certain period of time, or what does the policy actually say? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, any more questions of the officer? Councillor Don Kelly.
Yeah,
Suzanne,
thanks for.
Suzanne wants to come back here. Just sorry, Councillor Kelly.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to confirm, there's no time period set out in CTY3. In terms of your point, Councillor Kerrigan, about it being used as a dwelling, I think that my point is that it was not a dwelling. It may have been used for accommodation, but there is a difference between a dwelling and other buildings that are built for accommodation purposes. So that's my point here in relation to this.
Okay. Councillor Don Kelly.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, the question on the timing has been answered. And the other point I want to pick up on is just in terms of the policy. It does say, for the purposes of this policy, all references to dwellings will include buildings previously used as dwellings. I mean, it doesn't matter at what point it was used as a dwelling. If the building was previously used as a dwelling, this policy applies. Is that not correct?
Okay, through the chair. I think Councillor Kelly, I mean, using the building for residential accommodation is not the same, not always the same as using it for a dwelling. A dwelling is clearly defined in the use classes order, okay? And other types of buildings with residential accommodation are different use classes. We have no information that this was ever used as a single dwelling. That's the issue here. And just in terms of, yeah, you're quite right in terms of your interpretation of CTY3, but the point is that this building doesn't appear to be used as a single dwelling.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point, just of clarification in terms of some of the discussion. The point is as well that the nature of the huts, I imagine, that sprinkled around different parts of the countryside at the time was to accommodate special sort of projects or movements that the personnel and, where soldiers were carrying out. I don't imagine they were meant to be permanent. They were temporary. They were coming and going, and, they were moving around. It was there for all our different types of movements. It was never meant to be probably a permanent location and a dwelling, as obviously Suzanne's pointed out. So even the fact that there's a different use class, it was a temporary accommodation. And we do get plan applications for dwellings now. We get applications for multiple housing units. We get applications for temporary accommodation, temporary accommodation for schools and whatever. And we know that they're only meant to be for a short period of time, porta cabins or whatever. So I suppose that's a point I want to make. There's also the temporary nature of that use at the time, and the nature of some of the evidence that's been supplied appears to be very sort of circumstantial and coming and going and not permanent. Anyway, temporary.
Any more questions or Councillor Mooney?
Yeah, just a comment. I'm just looking at the definition of dwelling, and it's come up as a house, flat, or other place of residence. And then residence then is defined as a person's home. So in any reasonable interpretation, that's not a dwelling. Well, so I just want to put that on the records. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Quick comment.
Councillor Hussey, then Councillor Kelly.
Just a quick comment. There are many structures which were designed to be temporary, but have lasted the test of time. And I could still take you to Nissen hut buildings that are in use, albeit 75 years after their original use ceased. And I suppose I could remind you that the Eiffel Tower was meant to be a temporary structure. Thank you.
Councillor Don Kelly.
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate the guidance from officers, but I do want to pick up on at the point in time that accommodation was installed. Nobody knew it was going to be temporary. Nobody knew how long the war was going to be. It had already been going on for a number of years by that time. So this idea that we can now kind of retrospectively say, well, it was going to be temporary accommodation, it's not misguidance, but it's I think it's a stretch to be able to apply that in hindsight, because when it was installed, I don't know that they knew that what the length of time temporary was going to be. The other issue, Chair, is I wonder, could I get the reference for in the policy that was just quoted for for dwelling, because I don't have that.
Quoted by Councillor Mooney.
Sorry. Yeah, it was Councillor Mooney quoted there. Yeah, a policy on the definition of dwelling. I don't have that in my policy.
No, it's not in policy. It's in a dictionary or something.
It's not in policy. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Patricia Logue.
Chair, I'm just coming on here, regarding definition of a dwelling, and it's showing houses, it's showing blacksmith actually, showing a beehive hut. But
Your line's very bad, Councillor Logue.
it's actually showing a beehive hut too as well. But it is saying in law, a dwelling is a self-contained unit of accommodation used by one or more households as a home, such as a house, apartment, a mobile home, a houseboat, vehicle, or any other substantial structure. So that's what I'm getting as the definition of a dwelling. Thank you.
Okay, we've been around the houses. Is there a proposal? Yeah. Around the huts. Councillor Boyle.
Chair, I've already put my cards on the table, so people will not be surprised to hear the following proposal from me. Based on the report in front of us, I already did say that I was particularly taken with the objectors' observations that were put forward. However, the presentation of the report, the debate around what is and isn't a dwelling and all of that, I am going to propose that we accept the officer recommendation again on this particular occasion, notwithstanding all of the history behind Nissen huts, Quonset huts or whatever. I do believe, despite what people may well have thought at the time, that these were erected as temporary accommodation for military personnel from wherever. And certainly the ambition at that time would have been that when things had settled and obviously an armistice had been reached, that these buildings would have been demolished. And had the situation in Derry City, for example, not been what it was in 1945-46, I have every expectation that if people had appropriate accommodation to be living in at that time, they would never have moved in to live in a place like Springtown Camp. They'd have much preferred bricks and mortar accommodation. So proposal is to accept officer recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
I've seconded that in the chat box, Chair.
Yeah.
Okay, Chair. So this is item 6, and the proposal is to accept the officer's recommendation. Alderman Alan Breslin.
Against.
Okay. Alderman Derek Hussey.
Against.
Yeah. Alderman Keith Kerrigan.
Against, Maura.
Thank you. Alderman Hilary McClintock.
Against, Maura.
Thank you. Councillor Jason Barr.
Abstain, Maura, due to technical difficulties at the start of that item.
Yeah, Councillor Barr wrote in the chat box he lost connection, so he has to abstain.
Okay. Councillor John Boyle.
For.
Councillor Angela Dobbins.
For, Maura.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Gallagher.
Against.
Councillor Christopher Jackson.
Against, Maura.
Thank you. Councillor Dan Kelly.
Against, Maura.
Thank you. Councillor Patricia Logue. Councillor Logue. Come
Yeah.
back. Could you just repeat that, Councillor Logue?
Oh, sorry, Maura. Again.
Thank you. Got that. Councillor Kieran Maguire.
Yes.
Thank you. Apologies from Philip McKinney and Councillor Sean Mooney.
For.
Okay. So, Chair, that's 3, 4, and
Okay.
9 against.
3, 4, 9 against. Have we another proposal? Another proposer?
Chair.
Councillor Don Kelly. Councillor Don Kelly. Councillor Kelly.
Hello, can you hear me now, Chair? Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, having some issues. Yeah, if you're looking for an alternative proposal, I propose that we don't accept the officer recommendation to refuse. And on the basis of I suppose my reasoning is the assessment is that it would detrimentally ruin the rural character. I don't accept that. I think if you look at what's not shown in the photographs is that, and this will be more pertinent perhaps for the long-term views of the site, and I appreciate that the officer report recognises that the site itself can actually accommodate a house without any detriment. But if you look at the broader context, especially in the long-range views, you'll see that Ballantyne's Quarry is a huge hole in the side of the hill. And I'm not having a go at that. It's been around forever. But in terms of context, when you look at this particular site from a long-range view, the corner of this field is not what you see. It's not what catches your eye. It is the quarry on the top of the hill, which actually goes right up onto the skyline. So I think it won't have any detrimental impact on the rural character. And as the planning officer report outlines, the site itself can accommodate a house without any impact. In terms of the issue around curtilage, I think if you look at the original layout, the site is, I accept, going to be not on the same footprint, but it's going to be within the original curtilage of the site at the time the house or the dwelling was established on that site. And I accept the bona fides of the local historian, Mr. Harley, in relation to the fact that this was used as accommodation by troops. In terms of ribbon development, which is basically CTY 8. Sorry, in terms of the actual principle of this being a dwelling, yes, I accept it is a dwelling for CTY 3 and does meet all of the requirements of CTY 3 as indicated. And I think the reason for moving it is that it will provide a degree of amenity towards the house that's been approved at the infill site, because they won't be looking out at that derelict building in front of them, that it would be replaced with, and I think it would be important maybe to be conditioned that it would be replaced and removed so that the new house on the neighbouring site would be less impactful in terms of amenity and provide everybody with a degree of that comfort. In terms of the ribbon development, I don't accept that issue because I don't see how you can take a building and replace a building within the original curtilage context so that you still have the 4 buildings in a row and you take one and you replace it, you still have 4 buildings in a row along that road. And I think there's a natural break then with the trees at the edge of that field. And I think if there's an issue, it can be conditioned that in terms of the site, that the building is kept towards the infill house at that end of the site rather than out towards the trees. Also, in terms of in terms of the Strabane area plan, just to quote that, Chair, into the record because I think it's relevant. At 120.3 of the Strabane area, in terms of the AONB location, the Strabane area plan states it is important to note that much of the AONB lies above the 200-metre contour, which this does, and that within that higher area little or no development pressure exists. This relatively remote part of the district suffers from a number of socio-economic problems associated with rural depopulation, which an unduly restrictive policy would serve to exacerbate. The area continues to experience both population decline and a decrease in its housing stock. So I think that it meets that in terms of the Strabane area plan. So in terms of the reasoning, Chair, that's my reasoning. Thanks.
Councillor Kerrigan, you're happy to second that?
Chair, I'm happy to second, and I don't think there's really anything more I can add. Councillor Kelly has dealt with every issue there in it. I do take on board his point, particularly in regards to the views of the site, because when you're Lisnara Road or when you're heading up to Dunnamana out of the Plum, I mean, as he stated, it's plainly stated, the thing you're looking at, if you're looking at it as you're looking at the quarry, you're not going to be really noticing the Nissan hut, or if there's a new dwelling there, it's the wee bit of the eyesore that was the remnants of the old quarry. So as I say, definitely I take on board points, and no, Chair, more than happy to second Councillor Kelly's proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Maura, will you take us through the vote?
Thank you, Chair. So this is item 6, proposal not to accept the officer's recommendation. Alderman Alan Breslin. Alderman Alan Breslin. I'll come back. Alderman Derek Hussey.
For.
Thank you. Alderman Keith Kerrigan.
For, Maura.
Thank you.
Here
Alderman
now,
Holly
Maura.
McClintock. Yes. Alderman Alan Breslin.
For.
Thank you. Alderman Hilary McClintock.
For, Maura.
Got you. Thank you. Councillor Jason Barr. We're still. Councillor John Boyle.
Against.
Councillor Angela Dobbins.
I'll abstain, Maura.
Councillor Paul Gallagher.
For.
Councillor Christopher Jackson.
Or more.
Thanks. Councillor Dan Kelly.
For, Maura.
Yeah. Councillor Patricia Logue.
For.
Thank you, Patricia. Councillor Kieran Maguire. For. Councillor Philip McKinney. Apologies. And Councillor Sean Mooney. So that's 9 for and 2 against. One abstention. Thank you.
Back to item 4. Is that Molly, is it? Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Item 4 is LA 11 2021 0812F. It's a fall application for a proposed 2-story extension to existing community building to provide new entrance, reception, cafe and kitchen, lobby, social space and office. And it'll also involve internal reconfiguration to provide auditorium and exhibition space. And there's an extension to the existing car park. And it's located within the gas yard development site at 128 Lecky Road. The image is before you here where the application site is outlined in red, which is a portion of the gas yard site that currently exists. It's a community hub with open space and car parking along the Lecky Road. The land in blue is the other land owned by the gas yard trust. And the hatched area in the middle is the footprint of the area to be extended on the physical building. The image here shows the principal elevation and area of the proposed extension. Again, this is an image from the Lecky Road, giving you the context of the site with the car park foreground, the actual existing community centre, and Celtic Park to the back. This is the site layout, the area, the extension. In addition to that, there's a new paved area and a small extension to the car park and a reconfiguration of the car parking spaces that currently exist at the site. And the proposed ground floor layout, it's the area in pink and blue. On ground floor will provide a cafe and the associated kitchen area. And there's some internal reconfiguration. The existing location of the cafe is to be moved into the new extension. And at the first floor level, there's a small element at first floor level to provide a social room. And I suppose it's the form of development is a porch extension to the existing two-story building. So just to give you an idea of the existing uses within the facilities within the gas yard, you have the arts factory, an auditorium, cafe, dental suite, and a number of other community uses, including the Sure Start and Lee School, even more. The external alterations would involve the erection of a modern, contemporary two-story front extension. And these are pretty good images submitted by the agent to give you an idea of the design, scale, and mass of the proposed extension. Here, so the ground floor level will be the cafe, and you'll see the first story level here, just where the cursor is at the minute. Again, some further images here showing the proposed extension. So in terms of the policy context, so the area plan, the SPPS, PPS free in relation to access, movement, and parking. And we consulted a number of bodies in relation to the application. We consulted DFA Roads, who advised on the need for additional 12 spaces under published parking standards. The additional spaces have been provided to meet this requirement. We also consulted our own environmental health section and NIA land regulation unit. Given the former use of the site as a gasworks, there's a number of supporting documents relating to contamination. So these were assessed by the relevant consultees, and there's no objection subject to conditions and informatives. We've also consulted NA Water, who have provided standard advice. In terms of the concept, it's a contemporary design reflecting the former use of the site as a gasworks, with the current building has prominent circle sections that mimic the gas towers, which were connected to a stone-clad link. The extension will be in keeping and respect the modern contemporary themes and finishes of the host building. So in summary, this is an established community building. The building and the extension has been carefully decided to take account of the former land use, the modest extension, internal reconfiguration, associated works would enhance the existing provision at a long-standing community hub. There's no anticipated impacts to neighbouring amenity, as many of the uses are pre-existing, such as a cafe, and environmental health have provided conditions to safeguard the amenity of nearby residents. So in conclusion, the recommendation is to approve. The proposal complies with the relevant planning policy and guidance. All consultees have no objections. There's been no representations received. There's no concerns with regards, from officers' point of view, no concerns with regards to residential amenity. And officers believe the proposed extension is modest in scale, form, and the design and use of materials are sensitive to its location. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Malachy. Any questions for the officer? Any proposals? Roger Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. Well, thanks for the report, Malachy. And I think, when we all look at the design, and it is indeed, as you quite rightly describe it, it's a modest proposal that's here in front of us, but of course it provides for further opportunity as a community facility in the Brandywell and Bogside area going forward. And obviously much good work has been done in years gone by some of the organisations here located in the gas yard centre, and this gives them further opportunity to expand upon that. So, Chair, I propose we accept the officer recommendation.
Okay, Councillor Jackson.
Chair, and on the same vein, I'm happy to second the proposal. The gas yard is
a well-established and much-loved community facility. This proposal enhances the offering what the gas yard provides with and has no negative impact on the community whatsoever. So there's and it adheres to all planning policies. So I'm happy to second the proposal. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone against? No. Any abstentions? No. All in favor? Unanimous. Okay. Thank you. Item 8. 8 to 10 is for information. Do you want any comments, Suzanne? No? Okay. Proposal into confidential?
So proposed, Chair.
Seconded, Chair.
Reason from the confidential? 2 pages. Anything?